what advice would you have for young students like us who are motivated, who are looking to find ways to continue their curiosity and work on important problems?
Well, I mean, this is a standard question that I've often got from, in press conferences and so forth, so I do have a sort of fairly standard answer, which I'll give you. Well, I think the first thing is whatever else you do follow your curiosity. If a question seems interesting to you and you don't understand what's going on, then don't worry too much if everyone else says that that's a silly question. Everyone knows how that works. I always think about Einstein in this context. For about 250 years before Einstein, everyone had known that all types of physical body, no matter whether you're talking about a stone or a feather or a bird or whatever, in a vacuum they'll fall at the same rate. Einstein asked why. And I'm sure that a lot of his colleagues, I remember he was pretty junior at the time, I'm sure a lot of his colleagues say, yeah, that's a stupid question. I mean, everyone knows they just do. But of course he pursued it, and eventually out of that came the general theory of relativity. So as I say, don't be put off if people think that the question you're asking is silly. Follow it up, and until you're satisfied, don't drop it. The second thing I advise people is don't worry too much about the existing literature. It's often better not to read the 200-odd papers which have been written on the topic, but rather to see whether you can think out an approach based on the general physics that you know. That's basically what I did with the helium-3 business. I knew that there were large tomes written on the subject of nuclear magnetic resonance. I also sort of knew in my gut they couldn't be right, or at least more precisely, they couldn't apply to this experiment. And so I decided to start basically from scratch and used rather general ideas which I'd picked up about sun rules and things like that, and that did turn out to work eventually. Point 3, don't ever worry about having wasted your time. That is, if you've done let's say a theorist, okay? If you're a theorist and you've tried to work on a certain problem and it's gone nowhere, and you don't think, oh, the last 3 months were wasted. They weren't. Just write up what you've done fairly conscientiously and completely, put it away in a drawer, and I would bet that 10 or 15 years down the road it's going to come around and help you out in probably some totally different context. That's what happened to me, for example, when I was working in Japan. I did some work on so-called two-band superconductors. It was a brief period when it was thought that Nobel was a two-band superconductor. So I did a theory of some phenomenon which might occur in a two-band superconductor, and I got to the point where I actually wrote a couple of small articles on it. But then it turned out that they did another experiment, Nobel was not a two-band superconductor. So I sort of thought, well, yeah, it's a waste of time. But I did write it up. I did write the articles. I put it away. And later, that was the key, in fact, to the more microscopic work that I did in the helium-3 area. Fourthly, always try to make life as simple as possible. Again, this is probably more for the theory people than experimentalists, but I found as a graduate student, and a lot of my contemporaries did, it was a huge temptation to learn up the most fancy theoretical methods and so forth, functional integrals, Green's functions, you name it, and then to just automatically apply those to any problem you were facing with. Well, I mean, maybe you might even get somewhere doing that, but even if you get something out doing that, don't be content with that. Try and find a much simpler, more intuitive way of looking at the problem. That'll be far more understanding than grinding through this complicated stuff. And then finally, and I think this is very important, it's again, I'm giving you my standard speech on this topic, basically. If you're going into academic life, either as a university teacher or as a high school teacher, then whatever else you do, take your teaching at least as seriously as you do your research. That will be not only good for you, good for your students, it'll also be good for you. I would say that at least half of the good ideas I've had throughout my career have come, at least indirectly, out of the teaching I was doing. So remember, you're not just a researcher, you're also a teacher. And take that seriously.
We have thank you for sharing that. I think that's a very like seeing that like teaching not as a burden perhaps, but as a way to get ideas and bounce off ideas of students, and especially people who have a limited understanding of the topics you may be teaching or talking about.
Yes.
And they may see it in a new way, which knowing what you know, you can take that and create something that has that didn't exist before.
Yes, right. Yes, I always managed to practice both at Sussex and at Illinois here to volunteer to teach courses which were not in my specialist area, because I believe that by doing so, if you have to look at the subject from scratch, well, you're in the same position as your students. You see all the difficulties they're likely to see, which you won't. But basically, you've been doing the subject for 30 years. So, yeah.